Imagine standing in a courtroom, the air thick with tension, as the judge's hammer maul strikes. The faces before you, once full of arrogance and power, now crumble under the weight of an irreversible reality. These are the moments when justice is served in its most unforgiving form.
Yes, she was victimized. Yes, I was victimized to myself.
Life sentences handed down to those who prey on the innocent.
He is sentenced to a term of life imprisonment.
But what truly goes through the minds of these predators as their fate is sealed? Do they feel remorse, fear, or a twisted sense of injustice? Join us as we unravel 15 child predators reacting to life sentences. Number 15. Granville Richie. The tragic murder of a 9-year-old girl from Tampa sent shockwaves through the community. Over the weekend, her lifeless, naked body was discovered floating near the Courtney Campbell Causeway, leaving everyone in horror and disbelief. The accused, Granville Richie, was eventually arrested and charged with the horrific crime of improper contact and the murder of young Felicia Williams. Felicia's death devastated her family and friends, leaving an irreplaceable void in their lives. As the trial happened, the offender was confronted with chilling details that painted a grim picture of the crime. The sentencing phase began with heart-wrenching testimonies that left the courtroom in tears. Felicia's grandmother, overwhelmed with grief, tearfully addressed the court, saying, "I just miss my grandbaby." Felicia Demerson, the heartbroken mother of the young victim, made it clear what she wanted for Granville Richie. "I have waited 2,310 days for this moment. If I could, I would ask for him to be hanged, so he could feel the same pain my daughter felt." Felicia's sister also spoke, expressing the profound loss the family endured. "She meant the world to us, and he discarded her like she was nothing," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. The testimonies were so deeply moving that even Hillsborough Circuit Judge Michelle Cisco couldn't hold back her tears. "My heart breaks for you as a mother," she said, her voice filled with empathy and sorrow. However, the most unexpected moment came when Felicia's father took the stand. Despite the overwhelming pain, he showcased an astonishing level of forgiveness. "That's how strong my God is," he said calmly. "I can smile at you today with no ill will toward you. You made a mistake, but you still have time. Time to make things right with God." In the end, Judge Cisco delivered the final verdict. As to count 1, for the first-degree murder of Felicia Williams, the defendant, Granville Richie, is hereby sentenced to death. But Judge Cisco wasn't done with Granville yet. Despite his attempt to appeal the death sentence, the Supreme Court dismissed his plea, showing no leniency for his lack of remorse. Now, Granville Richie sits in prison, waiting for the day when his sentence will be carried out. Number 14. Terrence Lamont King. In a deeply troubling case from Georgia, a pastor who had been serving his church since 2010 was found guilty of severe crimes, including child molestation and enticing a child. This pastor abused his position of trust, manipulating a woman from his congregation into believing they were in a romantic relationship. Catching on her trust and emotions, he groomed her and exploited her weaknesses. The inappropriate relationship began when the young girl was just 15 years old. The pastor would take her to hotels under the guise of having a good time. Thankfully, the woman's mother uncovered their inappropriate conversations on Facebook, which exposed the pastor's misconduct. This revelation led to the pastor's arrest and subsequent charges. District Attorney Mark W. Anthony condemned the pastor's actions, highlighting the betrayal of trust and the misuse of his spiritual authority. He stated that the pastor had seduced the young girl, making her believe they were involved romantically, and then took advantage of her innocence for his own desires. Given the abuse of his position and the harm caused, the DA deemed the sentence both fair and just. After a lengthy trial, a jury convicted the pastor, and the judge imposed a strict sentence. The judge prohibited any contact between the pastor and the victim or her family, whether direct or indirect. This measure ensured the victim's safety and provided some sense of justice. The prosecutor praised the victim's courage for confronting her abuser, acknowledging the immense bravery required to face such a traumatic experience. In a powerful statement, the judge described the pastor as a wolf in sheep's clothing, emphasizing how deeply the victim was hurt by his betrayal. The judge sentenced the pastor to 30 years in prison, with the remaining years of his life on probation. As the sentence was delivered, the pastor sat calmly, fully aware of how drastically his life was about to change. Number 13. Lewis Matthews. As Matthew exited the courtroom, he shook his attorney's hand with an odd chuckle, a stark contrast to the gravity of the moment. Just moments before, the judge had sentenced him to life in prison. While many would cry, scream, or fall silent in the face of such a verdict, 43-year-old Lewis Matthews displayed an unsettling calm. He was captured on camera, laughing and shaking hands with his lawyer, despite being condemned for a horrible crime. On the early morning of April 13 at around 3:30 a.m., Lewis Matthews, in a disturbing act of cruelty, poured caustic bleach onto a young girl. This girl was the daughter of his girlfriend, and she was sleeping on the living room floor when Matthews came downstairs and assaulted her. Her mother, who had been fast asleep, was awakened by her daughter's screams. Rushing downstairs, she was horrified to find Matthews in the middle of the brutal attack. In shock, she immediately called 911. In a frenzy, Matthews grabbed the girl by her clothes and fled the house, driving to a nearby gas station. Once there, he forced her into the convenience store and instructed her to wait for him in the bathroom. He then grabbed a bottle of Clorox bleach from a stand and re-entered the bathroom. In a disturbing attempt to erase any trace of his presence, Matthews poured bleach over the girl. He discarded her underwear in a dumpster behind the store, but his efforts were in vain. DNA evidence was still found on her other clothes. The trauma inflicted on this young girl, who had once trusted Matthews as a father figure, is unimaginable. Neither she nor her mother attended Matthews' court hearing. Fortunately, Matthews will now spend the rest of his life behind bars where he can no longer cause harm. Number 12. Arthur Leon Vitasek. Arthur Leon Vitasek, one of America's most notorious criminals. His life of crime began in 1990, and his illegal activities were as cunning as they were cruel. Vitasek preyed on single mothers who were struggling financially, offering them help with their possessions and showering their sons with gifts and attention. In return, he manipulated these boys and subjected them to physical abuse. For over 15 years, Vitasek targeted at least 8 boys. Using the internet to connect with some victims, he deceived others by convincing their mothers to let him take their children to his home. After a year and a half of evading capture, Vitasek was finally arrested in Dallas, Texas, in November 2006. During his court hearing, Vitasek showed no remorse for his actions. He even proclaimed himself to be the most pleasant guy in the world. The jury found him guilty of numerous charges, including child abuse and public immorality, totaling 26 counts. Reports also emerged that he had threatened the mothers of his victims. One of the boys he abused shared the lasting impact of Vitasek's cruelty. "I live with the pain every day. I can't even ride in a Mustang or drink tea without being reminded of what he did to me." After being convicted of multiple counts of child abuse, Judge Peter Reinstein of Maricopa County Superior Court sentenced Vitasek to an astonishing 560 years in prison. Number 11. Larry Nassar. Larry Nassar was a former osteopathic sports physician affiliated with Michigan State University and USA Gymnastics. He became infamous for his offensive crimes, which he committed under the pretense of medical treatment. Nassar exploited a rare therapy method, using it as a cover for his abuse. He disregarded basic medical protocols, such as wearing gloves, obtaining consent, and having a medical companion present. During the investigation, Nassar denied all responsibility, shifting the blame onto his victims. He questioned why they hadn't spoken out sooner, failing to grasp that without trust and clear communication, his actions went unnoticed by many. One victim, during the trial, shared how Nassar's actions had deeply impacted her. She recounted multiple assaults at various appointments, with her last treatment in August 2016. Tragically, she might have been his final victim, but she wasn't alone. Victims' families also came forward with heart-wrenching accounts of their experiences. Chelsea Markham's mother spoke emotionally about her daughter's suffering. She described how Chelsea had confided in her about Nassar's inappropriate actions during an examination. Chelsea had told her mother that Nassar had touched her inappropriately without gloves. Unable to cope with the trauma, Chelsea took her own life in 2009. Her mother expressed profound grief over losing her daughter and shared how the pain remains a constant part of her life. In court, when it was Nassar's turn to speak, he attempted to apologize. He acknowledged that his own feelings of distress were minor compared to the pain and trauma he caused. He claimed that no apology could fully express his remorse. However, the judge was unyielding. Before announcing the sentence, she read a letter Nassar had written during the investigation, in which he accused Judge Aquilina of turning the trial into a media spectacle. The judge then delivered Nassar's sentence. She emphasized that his actions were deliberate and calculated. The sentence was a staggering 175 years, equivalent to 2001 months, ensuring that he would never again walk outside of a prison. Number 10. John Aklan. John Aklan, a former resident of Livingston, became infamous for his horrific actions that shocked even the most seasoned judge. At 56, Aklan of Bandera, Texas, faced the full weight of justice in Columbia County Court for his horrific crimes. He was handed a staggering sentence of over 300 years in state prison, the maximum penalty for each of the 16 counts of assault against 2 young children. The heartache of these cases continues to resonate deeply, despite the tireless efforts of state police, Texas Rangers, and the Child Advocacy Center. These dedicated professionals work relentlessly for the victims, whose courage has been both inspiring and deeply moving. The investigation into Aklan's crimes began in 2017, following disturbing reports of abuse in Livingston. Authorities uncovered that Aklan had inflicted severe abuse on his young victims between December 2004 and March 2006. Although the abuse ceased when Aklan relocated to Texas, the psychological and physical scars left on the children were permanent. One of the survivors expressed profound resilience and defiance, stating, "I am not defined by what happened to me. I hope you never see daylight again and never come near children." Aklan's conviction by the Columbia County jury was marked by several serious charges, including improper conduct against a child and aggravated abuse in both the first and second degrees. Aklan's journey to justice began with his arrest in Texas on October 25, 2018. He was extradited to New York on November 8 of the same year, thanks to the collaboration of state authorities that ensured he faced justice where the crimes occurred. During the trial, John Hillman defended Aklan, while Chief Assistant District Attorney James Cucci and Assistant District Attorney Krista Klein prosecuted the case. Despite the overwhelming evidence against him, Aklan stubbornly denied the charges, claiming, "I was always good to those kids." Judge Jonathan D. Nichols was unmoved by Aklan's denials. Aklan was found guilty on all counts and received a sentence of 335 years in prison, ensuring he would live and die behind bars. His reaction to the verdict was chillingly emotionless, even as his victims spoke out. Number 9. Christopher Elwell. Christopher Elwell, a convicted sex offender, found himself in a dramatic and shocking confrontation in court. Elwell, who had been previously convicted of sexual offenses in January 2008, was once again facing serious charges. He had been found guilty of committing further evil acts between June 24th and June 25th, 2018, at a residence in Mineral Park, Dover. In the past, Elwell had been released after completing a rehabilitation program for offenders, but his release didn't prevent him from repeating his crimes a decade later. To make matters worse, he had failed to register as a sex offender as required by law. The intense drama happened when Elwell was sentenced to 15 years in prison and led to the benches at the back of the courtroom. As Elwell took his seat, Josiah Davis, who was on the same bench and awaiting his own court hearing, head-butted Elwell twice. Davis, a pretrial inmate from the Strafford County House of Corrections, was shackled along with Elwell. Despite the restraints, Davis managed to strike Elwell twice under the jaw before being restrained by a deputy sheriff. Interestingly, Davis and Elwell had never met before this incident. Davis faced additional consequences for his actions, receiving an extra 3-year sentence for the assault. Meanwhile, Elwell's troubles didn't end there. He was also handed a further sentence after investigations revealed he had violently attacked his cellmate, Matthew Melvin, just days before his court appearance. The tangled web of their legal troubles and their violent actions may seem confusing, but at least they are now both behind bars. Number 8. Ronnie Salazar. Ronnie Salazar, 24, faced a mercifulness hearing in Miami, Florida, for the sexual abuse and first-degree murder of his 11-year-old sister. Recently, the state of Florida made a significant change in its laws, banning life sentences for young offenders. This new law has overturned Salazar's original life sentence, giving him a chance for a reduced sentence. Salazar's background is deeply troubled. As a young child, he experienced severe poverty and was mistreated by his parents. When his parents moved to the United States, they left him behind, forcing him to live in dire conditions. After being abandoned by his grandparents, Salazar's family eventually brought him to Miami when he was just 10 years old. By then, his parents had 2 more children, and Salazar felt a renewed sense of rejection and isolation. He reflected on his painful past, sharing that his parents never explained why they had left him behind. Despite his attempts to confront this past, the pain lingered, and he felt a profound sense of loss. Judge Ellen Sue Venzer, who had previously sentenced Salazar to life in prison, has now sentenced him to 40 years, with a chance of parole after 25 years. As Salazar received this new sentence, he broke down in tears, displaying his deep remorse. His sincere regret stands in sharp contrast to that of Alfredo Lopez Cruz, who offered a brief and less heartfelt apology. Salazar's emotional response highlights his genuine feelings of remorse and the impact of his troubled past on his current situation. Number 7. Anthony Thornton. Anthony Thornton, seated in the courtroom, was instructed to remain silent. He faced serious charges of sexual assault in Wayne County. The real evidence that led to his conviction was DNA. In a crucial moment during the investigation, Thornton had consented to a DNA test, which eventually linked him to several unsolved cases in the Detroit area stretching back 7 years. It was this very DNA evidence that played a key role in bringing him to trial today. The charges against Thornton were tied to an alleged assault on a 19-year-old woman he met while they were both living in a Detroit homeless shelter in April 2010. Thornton had enticed the victim into an abandoned building under the pretense of spending time together, drinking, smoking, and playing cards. It was in this desolate place that the alleged assault occurred. After the attack, a DNA test was performed on the victim, but it remained unprocessed for years. When it was finally examined, the results matched Thornton's DNA, identifying him as the perpetrator. In court, Anthony decided to take the stand in his own defense. He admitted, "Yes, it was me, but it was consensual. I asked her eventually." Despite his attempt to justify his actions, the jury found him guilty. As the judge prepared to deliver the sentence, Thornton's outburst became the unexpected highlight of the proceedings. Judge Vonda Evans, maintaining her composure, ordered, "Be quiet and don't speak in my courtroom." As Thornton continued to protest, the judge firmly instructed, "Take him out now." After his removal from the courtroom, Judge Evans continued with the verdict unaffected by the disruption. She declared Thornton guilty on both counts of criminal sexual conduct beyond a reasonable doubt. She concluded, "Your behavior was unacceptable, and I must ensure justice is served." Thornton was subsequently sentenced to 15 to 30 years in prison. His reaction to the sentence mirrored his earlier outbursts, revealing his deep frustration and disbelief. Number 6. Christopher Cena. Christopher Cena, born in 1966 in Las Vegas, Nevada, is a notorious criminal whose life story is marred by unrelenting cruelty, abuse, and neglect. For over a decade, Cena subjected his 7 children, his partner, his stepmother, and even the family dog to horrific acts. The full extent of Cena's evil actions became known in 2014 when a SWAT team, acting on a tip from Deborah Cena, his ex-wife, raided his trailer near Nellis Air Force Base. The discoveries were truly disturbing. 2 of his children revealed that Cena had threatened them with harm if they ever dared to speak out about the abuse. Terry Cena, another former spouse, testified that the abuse began as early as the 1990s, starting with her 12-year-old sister. She expressed fear that Cena would hurt her children or even her if she did not comply with his demands. Most of Cena's victims were his own relatives, but he also pressured his children into bringing friends over to his trailer, where he would then exploit them. Neighbors reported that Cena seemed unusually eager when his sons invited their girlfriends over, hinting at his perverse intentions. In February 2019, Judge Bill Cart convicted Christopher Cena on numerous charges of abuse and child exploitation, delivering a sentence of 54 life terms. He was found guilty on 95 out of 120 felony counts and will not be eligible for parole for at least 341 years. Despite the severity of his sentence, Cena displayed a shocking lack of remorse, showing no sign of apology and even planning to appeal his conviction. Additionally, Deborah and Terry Cena received 10-year prison sentences for their roles in the abuse. Now it's time for today's subscriber's pick. In a dimly lit courtroom, the atmosphere was thick with tension. The echoes of whispered conversations and shuffling feet created an almost detectable sense of anticipation. Louis Matthews, a once revered figure in the community, had been exposed for the awful crimes he had committed against the most innocent and vulnerable. The trial had been a media sensation, with every detail scrutinized under the harsh spotlight of public attention. Judge Ellen Sue Venzer, a figure known for her unwavering commitment to justice, was presiding over the case. Her reputation for fairness and her firm attitude were well known. Today, her decision would not only shape the future of Louis Matthews, but also send a message to the entire nation about the gravity of his crimes. Louis Matthews, she declared, "The court has deliberated on the evidence presented and the impact of your actions. The sentence handed down today will reflect the severity of your crimes and the need to protect our society. You are sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Your actions have irrevocably harmed countless lives, and it is crucial that you remain imprisoned for the rest of your days." His defiant gaze had faltered, replaced by a look of despair. The gravity of the sentence seemed to sink in, and for the first time, he seemed to grab the true extent of his isolation. In the moments following the sentencing, the reactions of those present were varied and intense. Victims and their families, who had endured the long and painful journey of the trial, displayed a mix of relief and sorrow. What impact will this sentence have on the ongoing efforts to combat child exploitation and abuse? How can society better support victims and their families in the aftermath of such trials? Let's know your thoughts and comments. Number 5. Michael Sykes. Michael Sykes, a man with a dark and disturbing past, was involved in a relationship with Rebecca Cutler. Rebecca had 1 child with Sykes and 2 more children from a previous relationship. In September 2016, Sykes's jealousy turned deadly after discovering Rebecca had been texting another man. The tragic events began on September 10, 2016, when Sykes, consumed by rage, attacked Rebecca outside the Ramada Inn Hotel on Staten Island, New York. Hotel security cameras captured the disturbing scene of Rebecca, Sykes, and their 3 children entering the hotel. Once inside their room, the situation escalated violently. Sykes unleashed a brutal attack, stabbing Rebecca more than 40 times in front of her children. In a fit of uncontrollable fury, he also turned on Rebecca's daughter and his own biological child, stamping on both girls at least 5 times until they succumbed to their injuries. The third child tried to resist, but Sykes overpowered her, stabbing her more than 11 times before fleeing the scene. The following morning, a housekeeper discovered the horrific aftermath and immediately called for help. Miraculously, one of the children survived, though the others perished from their injuries. Sykes was apprehended 3 days later and taken into custody. During his trial, Sykes attempted to shift the blame, claiming that Rebecca was mentally unstable and that she attacked the children herself. For his crimes, Sykes was sentenced to life in prison. What shocked many was his reaction as the judge delivered the verdict. He remained strangely silent and avoided eye contact, showing no visible remorse for the horror he had inflicted. Number 4. Alfredo Lopez Cruz. At his arraignment, Alfredo Lopez displayed crocodile tears, attempting to evoke sympathy, but his actions are utterly devoid of any compassion. On June 19, 2005, Alfredo kidnapped a young lady in Hamilton, Ohio, subjecting her to horrific abuse before taking her bike for a joyride. The young lady, who lived with her grandmother and father, had passed a man sitting at a picnic table drinking beer. He had a bird tattoo on his shoulder and a noticeable mole on his mouth. With a gesture that indicated he wanted her to approach, she reluctantly came closer. Without warning, he forced her into his home, where he subjected her to an unimaginably brutal assault. Afterward, the young lady fled in a state of undress, managing to return to her house. Her father, alarmed by her condition, immediately grabbed his handgun and went to confront Lopez, while her grandmother called the police. However, Lopez had already fled, heading toward Mexico by the time the authorities arrived. He was later captured and returned to the United States, where he was sentenced to 3 life terms in prison. Although Alfredo showed some remorse, it was clear that it was insincere and failed to account for the gravity of his crimes. Number 3. James Tingley. James Tingley isn't facing these charges alone. Randy Stevens, the father of the children involved, is also in serious trouble. Stevens has been convicted on multiple counts of abuse, 5 counts related to the mistreatment of one of his daughters, and 3 counts of aiding and aiding Tingley. Stevens essentially facilitated Tingley's horrible acts by allowing him access to his daughters in exchange for money. Together, these men committed unprecedented levels of abuse. In court, Assistant Prosecutor Jennifer Walker did not hold back. She referred to these men as nothing more than animals, trading and exploiting vulnerable bodies. She made it clear that Tingley is the real monster here, deserving to be locked away for life, not just because of his actions, but because of the unthinkable damage he has inflicted on countless children. Addressing Tingley, he said, "You have been a threat for the last 40 to 50 years. From the evidence presented during the trial, we know that there are at least 5 additional victims beyond those directly involved in this case. Tingley, you are essentially a monster who has destroyed the innocence of numerous children. These victims will have to live with the scars of your actions for the rest of their lives. While some may eventually come to understand that they were not at fault, the impact on these young girls will be long-lasting." With that, Judge Wilson announced the sentence: 25 to 50 years for the first count, 25 to 50 years for counts 2 through 4, and 20 to 40 years for counts 5 and 6. James Tingley's accomplice, Randy Stevens, was also sentenced, receiving 39 to 60 years in prison. Number 2. Kenneth Atkins. Kenneth Atkins once commanded respect and admiration, reminiscent of the respect held for my own father. But now, all traces of that dignified image have vanished. Departing from Brunswick, Georgia, Atkins left behind his tailored suits and confident manner for a somber, dark green prison jumpsuit. In the courtroom, where he was once surrounded by supporters, the atmosphere had shifted dramatically. It was now filled with spectators and law enforcement, witnessing his dramatic fall from grace. Atkins, formerly a revered pastor in Brunswick, had been haunted by his past struggles with drug addiction. Despite his attempts to reinvent himself and create a positive public image, his efforts were overshadowed by his offensive remarks toward the LGBTQ+ community and troubling behavior online. His fate was sealed on April 10th when he was convicted on 8 charges related to evil acts involving children. The court found that Atkins had glaringly violated the trust placed in him, masquerading as a father figure while exploiting young victims. Despite his strong denials, the trial unveiled a harrowing picture of his conduct, including allegations of participating in illicit activities with a couple he had allegedly groomed. The case, tried at the Glenn County Courthouse, was marked by dramatic testimony and intense emotional narratives. One courageous survivor, now a military member, shared a heart-wrenching account of the lasting trauma inflicted by Atkins. They described overwhelming feelings of guilt, shame, and betrayal, and spoke of the manipulation and abuse that had shattered their trust. The trial was complex, fraught with conflicting testimonies and significant unknowns. Key details, such as dates and ages, were pivotal in determining the outcome. At his sentencing, Kenneth Atkins, now in a prison uniform, appeared markedly different from the confident figure that first entered the courtroom. Judge Stephen Scarlett imposed a severe sentence, condemning Atkins to life in prison. Despite this, Atkins maintained his stance, claiming persecution linked to his political beliefs as a Republican. Number 1. Michael Peach. Peach, a serial sex offender in Leicester, has a history of committing evil crimes. His dark journey began with his first conviction in 1996 for the severe abuse of a child. In 1997, Peach was found guilty again, facing new charges connected to the same child. His apparent remorse and the face of regret led to a reduced sentence, allowing him to be released from prison early just 2 years later. His most recent victim came into his life when Peach was employed by the same medical company as the boy's father. Exploiting his position, Peach manipulated his way into the boy's life, slowly gaining the family's trust. As Peach grew closer to the boy, he engaged in awful acts, even going so far as to record his crimes. This continued for a long time, until the boy, fed up with the abuse, finally confided in his mother about what Peach had been doing. The mother immediately reported the incident to the authorities. But in a desperate attempt to silence them, Peach broke into their home, armed with a gun. As he tried to reach the boy, the mother quickly hid her child upstairs. Peach, in his rage, shot her multiple times as she bravely tried to stop him from harming her son. A teenager in the family acted quickly, calling his father for help. As Peach fled the scene, he attempted to end his own life. The police pursued him through the neighborhood until he deliberately crashed his car into a wooded area. Realizing he was still alive, he retrieved a hunting knife and stabbed himself multiple times in the chest and throat. Despite his injuries, he survived and was eventually brought to justice. The judge who presided over his trial was deeply shocked by the extent of Peach's wickedness. Before delivering the final verdict, the judge addressed Peach, stating, "You knew you were caught being an exploiter for the 3rd time, so you premeditated a devilish attack on the mother and her children." He finally received a 48-year life sentence. Can anything ever undo the damage inflicted on these innocent lives? And what more can society do to prevent such horrors from happening in the first place? Share your thoughts and comments below.